Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's having an amazing Saturday. I'm coming on here again to do another video because there's been another question that I've been getting repeatedly again. And it's oftentimes easier for me to make a video than to try to explain to every individual the answer to their question. So the question I've been getting a lot lately is, what exactly are you doing, as in me? What am I doing? What are you doing for us when you do this allodial title process? I want to understand the concept. So I'm going to try to explain this to you in the way that it makes sense to me. I'm not saying it's the best way to explain it or that I'm not going to omit any details, but I'm just going to try to keep it basic and explain it in a way that it makes sense to me. So back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when the Crown was granting these parcels of land to all these different individuals and to, like the railway companies, the Hudson's Bay Company and all that, they were issuing them a document. And on there it said they were granting, and then the name of the grantee, they were granting him or the business, whatever, a certain parcel or tract of land, and then it would state the legal land description. Then on the bottom, prior to 1908, they would say that this guy was being granted this parcel or tract of land to his heirs, successors, and assigns forever. At that point, the grantee had equitable title to that land. He owned the actual physical land. Okay, and then along about 1908, they started changing the verbiage on the grant just a little bit. They still said this individual was being granted a certain parcel or tract of land, but on the bottom, then they changed it to say, instead of saying it was to his heirs, successors, and assigns forever, they said they were granting it in fee simple. So I did a video earlier about how I thought fee simple and assigns forever really ultimately meant the same thing, because the definition of fee simple is, I read it then, I'll read it again. It says, a fee simple absolute is an estate limited absolutely to amount of its heirs and assigns forever without limitation or condition. So initially that sounds exactly the same as assigns forever. However, just the other day, I went ahead and I looked up the word estate in Black's Law Dictionary, because Black's Law Dictionary, you see, if you Google what the word estate means, it says it's, this often a large tract of land with a large house on it, that kind of thing is considered an estate. Black's Law Dictionary says nothing about that. Black's Law Dictionary says that an estate is an interest. So on those fee simple grants, what they were saying was that this individual was being granted an estate or an interest in the certain parcel or tract of land. So that verbiage became just a little bit tricky there. It was a little bit alluding to the fact that this guy he didn't necessarily own the physical tract of land, he owned an interest in it. However, what happened later with both grants, assigns forever and fee simple, is within a very short while after having been given the grant, then the individual or the company or whoever would go into the land titles office and they would register that parcel or tract of land with the government. And at that point, the verbiage changed. Even though the legal land description stayed the same, the owner name stayed the same. Now, instead of saying they were granted a certain parcel or tract of land, it said that they had a certificate of title to an estate, and then the legal land description. So it switched it up just a little bit. So what I'm seeing here, what looks like to me from what I've learned in my studies of trusts, estates, and securities, all that kind of stuff, is at that point that they registered the land with the government is actually when they signed that parcel or tract of land over back to the government. So I also believe that at this point it gave the government access to leverage, because as we know, those of us who study anything to do with trusts, estates, and securities, basing on our birth certificate trust, everything is a security and everything gets leveraged on, meaning that they create sub-securities from the main security. So I think my opinion is that in registering that land, they also gave access to have that certificate of title get leveraged on. That's just a personal opinion. And in a way, for what I'm doing here, it's maybe neither here nor there. But so with this fee simple thing, even though the grant is a little bit more flimsy per se, I still think that when at the point that they registered it with the government, I think is when they actually gave the government control over that, over their property. They gave them the control to tax them and to issue bylaws and permits and stuff like that. So I don't think that just because the grant said fee simple, I don't think that there was really an enforcement policy in place for making people adhere to all this BS until that grant was registered with the government. So now with the allodial title process, so what I do for you guys is I trace the full chain of titles from yourself as a current owner all the way down to the Crown grant. Then I do up a declaration for you to post for 30 days to notify the public. What you're actually notifying the public about is that you are now, that this chain of titles proves that you are one of the heirs, successors, and assigns to that parcel of land. That's your proof. And now you are notifying the public that you are basically revoking that original registration. And you're taking that land, that equitable title to the land, you're taking it back to yourself. So, because technically, when they registered the land with the government, because we're under a maritime law, which is trust law, we granted, those original settlers and railway companies and all that, they basically gave the land to the government in trust. So, or back to, I guess I should say back to the Crown rather than the government. They gave the land back to the Crown, but the government had authority to impose bylaws and taxation, which ultimately benefits the Crown. But what we're actually doing when we post that declaration is we're notifying the public that we are revoking that registration and reclaiming that original Crown grant before any of this registration and government control came into effect. I don't know if this makes any sense, but that's kind of the way I have to think about it. And another thing with the fee simple, where it says that you're granted an estate. In my third video, I encourage people to also take steps towards changing their status, reclaim their securities, whatever you want to call it. If your grant is fee simple, that it's especially important. And the reason for that is because they're granting you an estate, which is technically an interest in the land, you want to be the one who is in control of the estate. Because ultimately that estate that they're referring to, I believe, is your birth certificate trust. So I hope this helps. I hope it makes sense. Have a great rest of your day.